Welcome to RCAM. I'm your host, Ryan, and thank you for tuning in today. I hope all of you are having a blessed day. So, today we are going to be reacting to Matt Walsh's recent appearance on the Tucker Carlson show. And I'm seeing the clips get spread around, and it already seems pretty controversial. So, I figured I'd weigh in and we'd watch this bad boy together. Now, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with me, I'm a huge fan of Walsh's work. I think he has done more to change the culture than any conservative bars none, and he is probably one of the best examples of what actual conservatism looks like in conservative media. Just that's just a fact. And actually, what led me to watching this video is I saw the clips on Twitter and saw people reacting to them. And one person reacted to the clip, and somebody actually, I tend to follow and agree with a lot of what she says, so I just kind of took her word for it. But she had basically made this an argument that Matt Walsh was basically in support of whatever people do in their own bedroom based off of this video. But then after watching, I'm like, no, actually, that's not the argument that he's making. So anyway, I figure we just react to it together and give it a watch. So without further ado, we're just gonna get into it.
Okay, so I'm not on X all that much, but I do read you, and sometimes I read your tweets and I'm like, Matt Walsh, ladies and gentlemen, spinning people up. Here's one. We've been saying for many years that gay adoption and surrogacy should be illegal. Now everyone else seems to be catching on. This is an abomination. We've been saying for many years that gay adoption is an abomination. I've never heard anybody say that.
Wow, we're just diving right in.
We're diving right in.
Gay adoption is an abomination.
So actual conservatives, have been saying that, but their voices are drowned out by all these fake and gay conservatives that don't actually care about tradition. And so, yeah, you wouldn't hear about it. And honestly, a lot of conservatives have kind of shrank back from this. They've kind of given up on the topic of gay marriage altogether, let alone being willing to touch the topic of gay adoption. But it's something that does need to be addressed. It's something that does need to be talked about. And it's something that more conservatives need to find their courage to talk about, because it's a really monumental issue. You know what I like about Carlson, by the way? He actually is like a man. This guy is fishing and hunting and he doesn't even, one of the cool things is he doesn't even use Twitter. So like when people are spurging out on this guy, he has no idea. He doesn't know. Because he doesn't read the comments, he's not paying attention to what anybody else is doing. He's out and about living his life and doing his own thing, and I think that is awesome. All right, let's get.
Yeah, well, I think there I was referring to social conservatives, because social conservatives still somehow get a bad rap. So, so-called social conservatives, even among other conservatives and other people on the right, it seems to me. But so when I say we, I mean like so-called social conservatives.
I've never heard them say that. I've never heard anybody. I think I agree with it, what you said, but I don't think I've ever heard a single person say that. Everyone seems to be afraid to say that.
Yeah, most people are. That's why I think. But so-called social conservatism is that's why it's not popular even on the right.
Can I ask you is there anything more hated on the right than social conservatism?
I don't think so.
So you could say, like, I think we should drop an atomic bomb on a bunch of people and just like kill them all and their kids, and people are like, well, that's a really good idea. But if you're like, actually, we should like save some kids, then they hate you. What is that?
Yeah. Or we should look at the way that human society was structured for thousands of years, and we should probably consider that they were right about a lot of that stuff. You know, maybe not everything,
Right.
maybe not everything, but there are just some certain basic civilizational truths that we have moved away from in recent decades. But I don't think there was any good reason to move away from them.
Yeah, he's right there too. It's like, just so people think just because it's new, it's better, and that's not always the case. There's a reason that civilizations did things that the way that they were, and like, Matt was saying, it doesn't mean that they're all good, but those traditions actually mean something. I think he has said this in the past. Like, people are so busy tearing down these fences and these walls that they don't even know why the walls were there to begin with. And there might actually be a good reason to have these fences up. And that's what I think, traditional conservatism offers. And I believe traditional conservatism has to be based and rooted in Christianity to be true conservatism. So what Walsh is really advocating here is a return to Christianity, basic Christian values that are time tested from the very beginning, doing things the way that God has ordained. And when we deviate from God's order, God's design, we see chaos unfolding. I sent a tweet out earlier talking about how feminism and the manosphere are two sides to basically the same demonic coin. They both deviate from God's design for humankind. And I think that's a recipe for disaster.
And so if human beings did something a certain way for literally millennia in every civilization that we know of, it's probably right. I mean, there's probably a lot to be said for it. Again, not in every case, but in most cases. So
it's worth pondering anyway. It tells you something if every civilization, none of which that we know of had contact with each other, came to the same conclusions.
Exactly. So it's something like the gay adoption. That, and this isn't the only argument against it, but I think it is a worthwhile argument that there's never been a society anywhere on earth, anywhere period, where they have had two men in a romantic relationship starting a family. That's never existed.
Also because it's just, nonsensical. Two men cannot actually start a family. It's biologically just not possible. It cannot happen. And I think that's a good indicator that something is awry. Like, if you have to depend on another woman's womb and another woman's eggs, and you have to put them, inside of a surrogate to have a biological baby, maybe, just maybe, that doesn't make sense. Maybe you're crossing too many lines. I don't know. That's just me. I think it doesn't make any sense. And even biologically speaking, so if you are a, like even a leftist, if you believe in like survival of the fittest, homosexuality in and of itself doesn't make any sense, because it will result inevitably in the extinction of the species if everybody adopts that mentality. So I don't know why it would be, promoted at all, like from just a logical standpoint.
It's always been a man and a woman start a family, or in certain ancient civilizations and even some primitive ones today, you might have a man and several women. You might have polygamy.
Mm-hmm. That's a pretty common feature, I would say.
Common, certainly common. But you never had. And why do you have polygamy? I don't support polygamy, but there was a logic to it, especially in ancient times.
Yes,
you got to create people. And the whole point is to create. The whole point of the family is to make children and care for them. And a family that's headed up by two gay men that's why it's an abomination. It's just
it never happened before, and now it's happening, and that's why we call it progress, right? This is progress. It's something that's never been done.
Yeah.
And
it's progress in the way it's progress in the way that cancer progresses. So when I hear about progressivism, I think of progressivism. It is progress.
So we're at stage 4 gay right now, would you say?
Oh, yeah. Full on stage 4.
State, yeah, we are terminal. Right?
It's a terminal case.
We're a terminal right now.
Yeah, I figure why not just jump right into it. So, but what is, so I think you make a obvious and very fair and smart point. We should pay attention to the way things have always been done because maybe we can learn something. It's like discarding it all. French Revolution style doesn't end well. I totally agree. But what's the more affirmative, detailed case against it? These kids don't have homes, and here are two loving parents to watch over the child. Why is that bad?
Yeah, well, I think that they're...
I'm going to get a little particular here. Like, define love, you know? Yeah. See, I have actually a pretty solid definition of what love is. And I define love by, obedience to God's commandments. So God teaches us how to love him the right way. It's a true, pure form sense of love, so, if we love the Lord with all of our heart, all of our mind, and all of our soul, he's going to be number one. We're not going to worship idols. We're not going to take his name in vain. We're going to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. If we love our neighbor as ourselves, then we'll honor our parents. We won't kill. We won't lie. We won't steal. We won't cheat. There's a definition to what that actually means in practicality. But just love, which is, this it's almost like just an empty platitude. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's just a way for them to describe their just the way they feel. And maybe they will apply some aspects of love, but they'll never truly love each other in the fullest extent of what that means, because I think love has to be rooted and grounded in something. It's not only a feeling, all right? Because feelings, they ebb and flow, they change. But love, true, profound love, is rooted and grounded in the truth. And that truth can only be found in, the Bible, in what God says.
First of all, it's interesting to note that when this conversation about gay parenthood first started really in earnest, like 10 years ago, most of the conversation was focused on adoption, and right. Gay men want to adopt. But now what's happened is there's been a shift, and now you've got a lot of these gay couples that are turning to surrogacy. Mm-hmm. So they're renting wombs, they're renting they're purchasing the body parts of women and renting them, using them like an Airbnb rental.
Wait, I thought we got rid of slavery.
Yeah, I would have thought, but okay. This is exactly, this is in a very literal sense, the objectification of a human being, treating them like an object, using them as an object.
Isn't that so funny too? Because feminists will say, that, people don't have a right to women's bodies. You hear that all the time. You don't have a right to women's bodies, except if you're gay and you want to use them as a surrogate. Yeah, you have a right. And there are some cases actually where they actually are fighting, like, legally for the right. Like, once they enter into contract with someone too, by the way, they have a right to tell that woman what to do with her body, which is crazy to me. But that is the case, which is it's just wild. Another thing too that I want to mention is, so gay adoption, that was an argument that people made in favor of gay marriage. And I do think that the church did not help with this, because we should be so willing to adopt and so willing to foster that there really isn't a need for these kids, because the church is stepping up to the plate and taking responsibility in that regard. And maybe, by design, there has been this wedge between the church and basically running, foster care and, child care. I do believe that's by design, but I do think when the church reneges on its responsibilities, yeah, you do get things like this happening.
So it's just interesting. There was a study done recently, a survey a couple of years ago, actually, that found that it was like 60+% of gay couples, when they think about parenting, they would prefer surrogacy. So it's this sleight of hand trick you see on the left a lot, where they want to bring about some social change and they present an argument for it. But then once they get what they want, they abandon that, and then you figure out what they actually wanted. So it's kind of like adoption has given way to surrogacy, and then the whole argument, which I never bought, which is that we're rescuing kids who are in these terrible situations in foster care, that's out the window, because these are not kids that you're rescuing. You're creating them. Rather than rescuing a kid from an unfortunate situation, you're creating them to be in an unfortunate situation from birth, which is a different thing. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that even if we're talking...
But would you concede that one upside to a collapsing post-industrial economy is there are a ton of poor people who are willing to have babies for profit?
I don't know that I would call that an upside. That's it.
Just like, this is so like...
Yeah, that's
people don't take 3 steps back. Like, if this were happening, and if Dickens were writing about this in the 1850s, you'd be like, wow, London's a very screwed up place.
Yeah.
Where we're taking advantage of the poor. Like, that's the step beyond prostitution.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is treating someone, as you said correctly, as an object.
But there's also the fundamental point, whether it's surrogacy or adoption, the fundamental point is, what does the child have a right to? We keep hearing about,
right.
We hear about this right to parenthood. I mean, you have gay couples now that are demanding insurance cover fertility treatments, as if the reason why 2 men can't make a baby is because of fertility problems. No, it's because of the laws of nature.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and something that I don't think enough conservatives actually, mention. What about the rights of the child? We do this really well with abortion. We rightly recognize the rights of the child with abortion, but we don't recognize this fact when it comes to, like surrogacy or gay adoption. We don't even fully think about the implications of surrogacy. And one of the things that radicalized me against surrogacy was Dave Rubin, who is a quote unquote conservative, who with his gay husband had 2 babies that they used surrogates to get to. But as he sat down and described what he had to do to get these babies, I was horrified. I was legitimately disgusted, because he had to, they picked, basically out of a catalog, women, that they wanted their eggs. Then they got the eggs from these women, and then both of them wanted a baby each with their genetic material. So they injected 2 different, eggs with their sperm from 2 different women. Then they put these eggs, and then they put the eggs into 2 surrogates. Talk about an identity crisis for that child. And nobody is asking what the implications of this are. Who's the mother of that child, too? It just creates this convoluted, crazy thing when you describe it. It just sounds insane. And we should be asking ourselves, how the hell did we get here? I mean, how did we descend this far into madness? And I think it goes back to 2015, I believe, is when same-sex, quote-unquote, marriage was legalized. Yeah, that's when we started to descend into total madness.
But, and that is cloaked under this, it's sort of under this umbrella of, well, I have a right to parenthood. No, you don't have a right to, what does that mean? No one has a right to be a parent. It's great to be a parent if you can, but you're not born with this like entitlement. You're entitled to a child. What the hell does that mean? Rather than talking about the right of the parent, let's talk about the right of the child. This applies to so many other. This applies to abortion. This applies to a lot of topics. What does the child have a right to? And I would say a child has a right to a mother and a father. A child has a right to the basic fundamental setup that billions of kids throughout history have had, which is a mother and a father. Now, if through the course of events, through no one's fault, that is taken away from a child, I mean, you can have a parent that dies, you end up with a single parent, you can have a divorce, which I think is terrible, but it's not supposed to work that way. So if you have a child in foster care, you're looking for a mother and a father. And to just say, okay, well, we'll give this child to 2 dads, you're basically giving up on that child. You're saying, well, yeah, we couldn't find the right setup for you, so instead you're getting this. And I just reject that. I reject that totally. And I also think, frankly, that, you know, a lot of people won't like this, but
I think we've passed the point where
right. No one likes anything that we're saying. Right. A child being in foster care is far from an ideal scenario. It's very, very sad. A child going to two gay parents, I think, is worse. I think it's easily worse, actually.
Why?
It's just more disordered. It's more confusing for the child. Again, neither scenario is good. We don't like either thing, but I don't see going to, you know, gay parents as an improvement over the what they had before. So
I agree. Yeah, I don't think it's an improvement at all, because they're still being deprived of a mother and a father, and then you're going to have somebody masquerading as the opposite sex to try to fill in that void, and they're going to do it poorly, and they're just going to grow up in this situation that's weird, and it's unnatural. Instead of growing up in a household that has a mother and a father. Two, I also think that foster care and adoption are really blessings for women who are unable to conceive, which is a tragic thing, for a woman to not be able to conceive. And you have this match made in heaven for these women. And now they have to compete with homosexuals who, by the nature of their relationship, can't have kids. They chose that. All right. They made the choice to be in that type of lifestyle. The mother who's barren did not make that choice. She did not choose to be barren. They made the choice to give up on the union that would result in bearing children. They did that.
So, do we know that it screws kids up, or we just sort of intuitively know it?
I think we intuitively know, but also there's been plenty of studies done about the mental health effects of kids that grow up in these, single sex, same sex parent homes. There's been a lot of studies done about it, but honestly, you can look at the studies, people will fact check, and they're there. I don't need studies for this. It's the same thing with the trans topic, from the very beginning, when we started talking about that, you had all these people saying, well, where are the studies? Where are the studies showing that we shouldn't chemically castrate a 5-year-old or a 12-year-old? Well, there are studies now that will bear that out, but we don't need a study to tell us that. This should be intuitive. We just intuitively know it. There are certain things as human beings that we just know. And one of them is that sexually mutilating a child is bad. Another one is that a child needs a mother and father. We just intuitively know that. I don't need any study. I don't care what any academic says about it. I don't care.
Yeah, I think that's a good mentality to have. And I think this is one of the beautiful things about standing on the truth of God's word, is that those things already inform you of what the truth is. So you don't have to do a lot of guesswork. Yeah, I don't care what your study says. I don't care. I know what the word of God says, and you can give me studies till you're blue in the face. It doesn't really matter to me. One argument that people used to use for, advocating for being transgender and doing these surgeries is that the people are ultimately happier. And they showed me a study with 50 individuals that they were happier after going through gender affirming care. I don't care, actually. It doesn't really make a difference if they're happy or not, because if you are pursuing happiness at the expense of truth, then that happiness is meaningless. It's worthless. People get happy doing a lot of evil, demented things. That is not a litmus test for what is true and what is good. There's a lot of things that I could do that would make me really happy, but probably wouldn't make my wife happy, or my daughters happy, or my family happy. I would be really happy just going out into the woods for, a couple months. I would like that. That would make me happy. But no, I'm not going to go do that because I have other people that I care about and love. And life is not about your own happiness. Life is about laying down your desires, your wants, your needs for the good of other people. And honestly, the end result of that is unspeakable joy because I have more joy than I ever thought I would have. And it's because I choose to put God first and my family first and love them with everything that I got. And sometimes I'll have to make decisions that don't initially benefit me, but benefit my family. And that's a good and beautiful thing. And that's something that these people largely ignore.
So when you were born, the AIDS crisis, AIDS was sort of in its early years. And there were famous people who had AIDS, who died of AIDS, who lied about why they were dying because they didn't want to admit that they were gay. So that was the world you were born into. Now being gay is like an advantage in college admissions in a lot of schools and in hiring. So like it's moved completely. It's like the opposite of what it was in 40 years. Why do you think that happened? And what do you think its effects are?
Yeah, I think that's it's the collapse of, well, it's just this war on, it's kind of what we started with. It's this war on normalcy, on civilization, really. It's part of the anti-family agenda, the anti-human agenda.
The anti-Christ agenda.
And I think that, and that's always been there. Why did it catch on, though, to such an extent? I think that the side that was supposed to stand up for the family and stand up for civilization largely failed and abdicated their responsibility to do so. You know, conservatives, the church has just largely failed. And not even failed, not even tried, really.
Not even tried. Why is that?
Fear, cowardice.
Yeah, I think cowardice is one of the biggest problems plaguing the church right now. People are so concerned with what the world thinks of them instead of standing on the truth of God's word and seeking God's approval. They're seeking man's approval, and then they acquiesce to evil. They give in to cowardice. And something that the cowards ought to know, especially in the church, is that cowards will not inherit the kingdom of God. They will be judged for their cowardness. And that is something that should make you rethink your positions and make you second guess yourself every time you shrink back from a confrontation, because your cowardice will cost you.
Hypocrisy. I mean hypocrisy in the actual sense, in the literal sense of not someone who's says something and does another, but someone who claims to believe something they don't, which is what actual hypocrisy is. And so we have a lot of hypocrites on the right and in the church, unfortunately, who are just claiming to believe things they don't really believe. And so I think that the answer is, it's like, why aren't there enough pastors in any church, in any denomination, standing up and talking about these issues and leading on these issues? And the answer is, well, there's a lot of cowards, but also a certain portion of them don't really believe it. I mean, they don't believe. It's like whether or not they really believe in God is a question. So I think that's a part of it too.
What do you think the effect of it has been? Not just the acceptance of homosexuality, but the celebration of it. Like what I remember hearing, 30 years ago, when this was gathering steam, people saying, well, why, it's not a threat to you. Gays aren't going to break into your house and, forcibly make you gay or something. Like, why do you care? And I thought that, kind of made sense to me at the time. But there's a sense that's just not true, actually, that it did have a big effect on everybody else. Do you think that?
It certainly did, because because it's always a lie, obviously, when they say, oh, this isn't, we just want to do what we want to do, and it won't affect you, and we don't need you to be involved. This is just what we're doing in the privacy of our own homes.
That was a good argument, though, don't you think?
In theory, in principle, it's a good
I'm
argument.
just saying as a kind of matter of slogans, like.
This is the argument, by the way, the one girl, Mega. I'll just read you her tweet real quick. She said in his discussion, she's referring to Matt Walsh on Tucker Carlson. He makes the argument that what someone else does in their own house doesn't affect us, and knowingly or unknowingly endorses the original lib argument of libertarian morals. So this is what so I don't hear that argument that he's making. So if I'm wrong and you hear something different, you let me know.
Like, that's better than just do it for Nike or have a Coke and a smile. That's like a really effective ad campaign for Americans, because that matches the American instinct, like, live and let live.
And there's a certain, it makes sense to an extent that if someone across the street from me is in their home doing some freaky weird stuff, and that's it, they're just in their home doing it, and I never even know about it or see it, my children don't see it, my children don't know about it, then yeah, it's hard to make an argument that I'm somehow impacted by that, because I'm not, except maybe in the most indirect sort of way. But that's not how it actually works. That's just the slogan. That's not what really happens.
Right.
And so we follow the trajectory, and we've seen this time and time again. It always starts with tolerance. They say, well, just tolerate this, which I guess we're supposed to think means, it's just people are doing this on their own. You don't have to. You could just stay out of it, and they'll stay away from you, and so tolerate it, right? Tolerance. So it starts there, but then it goes to very quickly acceptance, and then they start saying, well, you should accept this. Well, accept and tolerate are not exactly the same thing.
How are they different?
Well, tolerate means I just put up with it.
I allow it.
I put up with it. I don't try to stop it.
Right.
Is what tolerance means in the most literal sense. Accept means I'm embracing it.
Right.
It means I'm embracing it. But then they don't stop at accepting, because then they go to, well, okay, now actually we need you to celebrate it. So it goes from tolerance to acceptance to celebration.
So he makes exactly the same point Mega makes, he does. And so I think she dropped the ball on that one, which is a shame, because I actually took her word for it. So I retract. I thought Matt made an L take. I should have known better, but he's right. Yeah, and I'm not one of those people that, maybe once upon a time ago I was live what let live, but I'm not actually. If you're doing something immoral, even in private, that doesn't make it less immoral, Like, good notion of this is, what if, somebody, decides to get a doll, a sex doll, but it looks like a child. Do you think that's okay for them to do in private? Probably not, because there's implications to that. So I do think, no, we can't just live and let live, because what inevitably starts in the bedroom seeps into other parts of society. Actually, in that same tweet that I got into with Mega, there was this one person that came after me and basically said, we're gonna turn your kids gay whether you like it or not. So these people, they have an active agenda to try to convert and make apostles of their own, because they can't reproduce on their own. So they're going to try to reproduce through dogma and ideology, and they're going to use your kids to do that, to spread their demonic worldview.
And
pretty fast, actually.
Pretty fast. Yeah, I think there was a time when that process might have taken 10 years, and now it seems like it takes 10 minutes. So we went from decades ago. It was, hey, they're just in their private in their private lives, in their own homes doing this, doesn't affect you, to now, well, they're, I mean, literally marching in the street, you know, in leather bondage gear, like flaunting in front of confused children standing there.
Having sex on the street, actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Engaged in sexual acts. And even worse than that, they're going into the school systems. They're putting this stuff in the school. They're trying to tell my kids, well, my kids aren't in the school system, but, you know, they're trying to tell our kids.
Do the authorities know your kids aren't in the school system?
They do now. Yeah. We still, I'm in Tennessee, so we still have have that right in Tennessee so far. But then they start going into the school system and they start promoting this. They start trying to tell our kids that that you should also tolerate this and accept it and embrace it and celebrate it. There's this kind of, there's a, you know, what they're telling kids in school about homosexuality, for example, is not just biology. There's a moral message. They're giving them a moral message, and the moral message is, this is okay. There's nothing wrong with it. This is, you know, a gay couple is equal in every way to a straight couple. These are just different variations. You know, it's morally neutral. That's their message. That's ideology. That's not biology. And once you start doing that, then it's like very clear how this affects me. You know.
But how does it affect the society?
Well, it could fundamentally transform society and our basic priorities, how we live, what matters to us.
So we're not positive.
And not for the better, man, for the worse. Let's skip this.
Considering adding Bitcoin, if you want to, or some other cryptocurrency to your portfolio, iTrust can be trusted, and it's easy to understand. itrustcapital.com or click the link below. It scrambles the gender roles. That's what I notice, and that's what upsets me most, because I think everything is built on biology, on nature, and gender roles are a function of nature. And I think if you scramble that, if you confuse that, if you convince people that there's no difference between men and women, like that's when civilization falls.
Yeah.
Then you have like women fighting your wars.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And gender roles is another one. That again, it goes back to human civilization worked a certain way for thousands of years, and it seemed to work. And we went from, you know, mud huts to walking on the moon, if you believe we walked on the moon, which I absolutely do.
Boy, you are taking some bold positions this
that
morning.
Is bold. That is bold. I discovered.
So you want to know my take on the moon thing? So I'm not going to lie. When I saw the Katy Perry astronaut thing of her landing down, it did seem kind of fake and gay. I'm not, you know, it just did. But the reason I don't fully buy into the moon landing not being real, although I do have questions, is because I just don't think people can collectively pull off that kind of a lie. I just don't. You know, I don't think that we're smart enough to do that. And that's why, like, you would have to get a whole lot of people on board with this. And, you know, but the one question that I do have is, like, why haven't we gone back? Even what is it? Elon Musk just made mention of this, that we haven't been back to the moon. Why? You know, and then supposedly we don't have the technology to do that anymore. That just seems weird to me. So, anyway, that's my 2 cents on that.
You're taking on the entire internet.
We went from there to there with a kind of basic structure, with a basic setup. Gender roles is one of them. There's like this they were so basic, so fundamental that you didn't have a word for it. You know, if you go back to 1700 and use the term gender roles to anyone, they're not going to have any idea what the hell you're talking about, even though their entire society is structured around it.
Exactly.
And this is true even now. If you go outside of the kind of liberal Western bubble, which I've done once when we were doing What is a Woman, we went to Kenya and we talked to the Maasai tribe in Kenya.
Did they know what a woman was?
They did know what a woman was. They were confused by the question, not because they didn't know the answer, but because they couldn't possibly understand why it would even be asked.
Right.
But then I remember a lot of this didn't make it in the movie because it wasn't totally connected, but talking about gender roles with them. And again, they had no idea what that term even meant. But their whole society is completely structured around it. It was, if you're a man, this is what you do. If you're a woman, this is what you do. And that's it. And I remember asking one of the women, I was in there in her hut, which is actually made of like cow dung. And it's a 1-room hut and they all sleep on one bed, mud floor. And she was telling me what she does all day as the woman of the house, which is she takes care of the house, she takes care of the kids. And I asked her if she was happy doing this. And she laughed at me because it was such a ridiculous question. Because of course she is. And then I asked about depression, and this might be in the movie. I said, where I come from, there's a lot of people are depressed. And one of the guys said to me, well, we don't have that here. We don't do that. We don't have depression. That's not a thing here. And that's not, of course there's unhappiness. It's not like a utopia. I wouldn't want to live there, to be perfectly clear about it. But you do notice that in these societies that are structured around gender roles, there's a lot of anxiety and hangups that they don't have because they know they have a basic concept of who they are and what they're supposed to do.
Well, they're not at war with nature every day.
Right.
That is really interesting. That they don't even have concepts for these ideas because they are just so in tune with who they are and the role that they were born into that they don't experience things like depression like we do. That's wild. I mean, I don't really experience depression, full disclosure. I don't get depressed. I don't, but also I'm somebody that leans heavily into the role that I'm in. I know what my responsibility is. I know what my duty is. My responsibility is to love and care for my family and be a provider, and that's something I take seriously. So I'm not crazy about my job. I've said this before, but I go to work happy every day because I know I can provide, and that brings me a great deal of satisfaction. So, yeah, there is something to be said about that.
You can't beat nature. If I go out into a blizzard with my boxer shorts, I don't care what, my resolve level is or my courage. It's like I'm going to freeze to death because you can't beat nature because it's bigger than you because God created it. Right.
Yeah, and we are certainly discovering that in this culture. And that's why, you could go on TikTok which I don't recommend, but you can go on TikTok anytime and it's a whole genre of video now on TikTok where you've got these young women. It's usually young women who do these videos, these selfie videos where they're in tears crying because they went out into the working world and they found it so miserable and depressing and empty and they just hate it and they don't want to work and they don't want to do it and they're in despair over it. And that's exactly what's happened. I think we were the message to women.
Wait, so you're not only against gay adoption, you're against women working at banks?
Yeah. For the most.
Where did you get all these opinions?
It's not the ideal setup. Because, I mean, and just to be clear, I don't, I think that there are families where both parents have to work. I think there are a lot of families where they think both parents have to work, but they don't actually have to. It just depends on what your priorities are and if you're willing to make the sacrifices. I think most families, people say to me all the time, well, I'd love for it to be one income. I'd love to homeschool. I'd love to have a family. We can't afford it.
But you went to Harvard and had a big trust fund. It's easy for you to say
right,
that.
Exactly, yeah.
No, you didn't have any trust fund and you didn't even go to college.
Right.
And you worked at Blockbuster, and then you told me this last night at dinner. I had no idea. You worked at a couple Blockbusters.
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
I was an assistant manager at one of them.
Is that true?
I was. That's how low their standards were towards the end.
It was definitely toward the end.
I left Blockbuster, and then they went out of business shortly thereafter. So you can connect the dots on that.
It's not the first. By the way, it's not the first company you've worked at that's no longer with us, which is interesting. You are the destroyer. But how old were you when you got married?
25.
Then how long after that did your wife get pregnant with twins?
It was about a year and a half. Yeah.
In that point, I assume she was raising the twins, right?
Right. Yeah. I was working. I was making about $40,000 a year at the time. Half that when we first got married. But by the time we had kids, I was making about $40,000 a year.
And that was the only income in the family.
That was the only income in the family.
And no trust fund at all.
No. No. No savings of any kind. This was a time. There was one time I remember I went to the gas station to get gas, and my card was declined, got insufficient funds, and I'm at the gas station. I have no money. I can't, and the gas tank is empty because like when you're broke, your gas is always almost empty. And so I had no gas, I had insufficient funds, and I remember thinking, this is after I had 2 kids already. This is how broke we were. But I remember thinking, I'm going to have to ask someone at a gas station for money. I'm going to have to do this. I can't believe I'm going to have to. But I didn't. I just started looking under the chair for coins. And I found about like $1.50 in coins. And I went and paid for gas, $1.50 worth of gas in coins, enough to get home. And then we'll figure out the problem. But anyway, the point is we had no money. We were very broke. And, money went a little bit farther back then, but not that much farther. I mean, this wasn't 50 years ago, right?
How many years ago was
this? Was 11 years ago.
Right. It was 11 years ago.
I think he's mostly right when it comes to more people can probably do this than they think. And women are largely unhappier in the workplace than they are having children. I don't care what the feminists tell you. I don't care. That's just the truth. And maybe some of them don't realize it yet, but they will when their job forgets about them and they are alone. They come home to an empty house and they are not greeted by anybody. And that's one of the highlights of my day is coming home and seeing my beautiful wife waiting for me and my 2 daughters, my little ones now running out to me saying, "Dad," she's just adorable. But yeah, I do think women are largely unhappier doing that. And that there are added stressors to the family when women take more of an interest in their career over their family. Now, I don't think this is like a hard and fast rule that women can't work. I do think there are circumstances that can warrant a woman needing to work, and I think even biblical. Because the Proverbs 31 woman, she works, but the key difference is that everything she does in service to her family. And I think that's the right mentality.
All of us remember 11 years ago, it was same country.
Yeah, it was the same country. And we decided we wanted to have one income. We wanted to have a one income family. So family of 4 on one income. It was not a high income at all. It can be done. I think in most cases, you just have to be willing to make the sacrifices. And a lot of people aren't. And that's fine too, because you have to decide on what your priorities are. And so you might say, look, it's a priority to us that we have a big enough house that each person can have their own room. We don't want to share rooms for kids. It's a priority to us that we have 2 cars, that we can go on vacation, a nice vacation once a year, that we can have 2 or 3 TVs, that everyone can have a smartphone with all the plans. And we want to have, 5 different streaming subscriptions, and we want to be able to eat out whenever we want. Like, that's a priority to us. And okay, if that's a priority, then yeah, in a lot of cases, you're going to need double income. But if you're willing to say, okay, we're gonna downsize our home, we're gonna share bedrooms, we're gonna have 1 TV, we're gonna have 1 car, we're gonna go on much more modest vacations, and we're gonna cut things down to the bone a bit because it's worth it to us to be able to keep mom at home and to be able to homeschool or whatever it is. So I think if you're willing to say that, a lot of people could do it. But
do you think it is worth it?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
Why?
100%. Because a lot of the other stuff doesn't matter, really. It's like there's no happiness in that.
I think that's clearly true. On the other hand, it's a drag not having enough money. I've had more than enough money most of my life, but I have had periods where didn't have enough and had to sell stuff, and everyone goes through that, and it's a bummer.
It's very hard. Like I say, yeah, I having gone through it, it's really difficult. I much prefer having money to not having it, but not at the expense of having someone else raise my kids.
So what's the upside of?
Yeah, that's too big of a risk for me and my wife. Currently, right now, my wife works part-time, and she works in the evenings, and so like there's one of us always home with the kids. There's never a situation where one of us are not home, because we just don't want them with strangers all day, learning, bad behavior. We just don't want that. So that's what we are willing to do. Is it ideal for us? No, because some days, I'm coming and she's going, and we just see each other in passing, sometimes not at all. And that's not enjoyable, but you got to do what you got to do.
Making the conscious decision to have the mother of your children raise those children. The downside, I mean, you just described it, like you're going to sacrifice in order to get that. But if you do get that, what do you get?
Happiness in the home is a big thing. Not perfectly happy. It's not. You're going to have your problems and your struggles, and some of them may be financial, and there can be some real misery that comes from that. I don't deny it. But it's just a fundamentally happier home in my experience, when the children are being raised by their mother, by their parents. The kids are happier, and beyond happiness, you can control how your children are raised, and you can raise them with your value system and maintain that, which is almost impossible if you're putting your kids in public school, let's say. It's almost impossible because the kids they're going to spend 5 days a week, 7 hours a day, 9 months a year for 12 or 13 years of their formative years, not with you or your wife, in this government indoctrination center around their peers. And so inevitably they're going to be absorbing, they're going to start orienting themselves to the world based on that, by looking at their peers, not even so much what their teachers are telling them, but what their peers are doing. And that's what's going to happen. So at a certain point, you're going to you run the risk that you're just going to lose them. And that's why you have these parents who turn around and everything they've instilled in their kids seems to have just gone out the window.
Yeah, you're kind of just fighting an uphill battle when you send your kids to public schools. You just are. And your kids are surrounded nonstop with kids that have worldviews that might be diametrically opposed to yours, and they have different values and different cultures, and you're mixing them together. And we've been taught our whole lives that it's good, that, but I don't think it is, because then you have nothing grounding you. And there's this amalgamation. I suck at saying that word. This mix of different beliefs that I do think can cause quite a bit of confusion. And you spare your kids that when you root them and ground them in the truth. If you're a Christian, hopefully you're raising them up in the ways of the Lord so that they will not depart from it. But when you abdicate that responsibility to the public school system, well, you're not the one raising your kids in the way of the Lord. The public school is raising them in their ways. And we already know that the LGBTQ plus is hell-bent on indoctrination. Now, I obviously think the tides are changing in that regard with Trump, effectively banning diversity, equity, inclusion. And I'm sure he's going to make some more changes that will prevent these predators from preying on your kids.
But then we're told that if you don't do that, if you don't submit to the culture, then your kids are out of step with their peers. They're weird. They never quite fit in. They're just weird. They're weird.
What I find crazy about that statement too? Did I don't know. I went to public school. There are weird kids in public school, like very weird kids. All right. I had a girl that acted like a cat. This is before you could identify as a cat too. She'd act like a cat. There's this, the weird goth kid. Some of them are cool, but some of them are weird. I remember driving, and there's this kid that we went to school with, and I'm driving, and he wore like a trench coat, and I'm driving, and he just stands in the middle of the road and looks at me like menacingly. I'm like, dude, like I'm just trying to go to the park, man. What do you just move out of the way. Um, so yeah, you have your handful of weirdos in public schools too. And a lot of the homeschool kids that I've met, I'm not saying that there have been none that haven't been socially awkward, but most of them are actually social butterflies. My wife is one of those people. You would not be able to tell that she was homeschooled because she is more social than I am. She is very social. She's very pleasant. She's a breath of fresh air, a life of the party. She's someone you want to be around, and you wouldn't be able to tell that was the case with her.
Is that a risk? Is that a meaningful downside? Like, what do you think of that?
I don't think it's meaningful. Weird is, there are bad kinds of weird, but this is a good kind of weird.
Yes.
Yeah, I hear this a lot. People will say, well,
how do you socialize them?
Yeah, how do you socialize them? Do you want to keep your kid in a bubble?
Yes.
And it's like, yeah, I do. I absolutely want to keep my kids in a bubble. I really do. Not
But are they getting enough porn if they're in that bubble?
Right. Well, enough porn, enough time on TikTok. I mean, all that sort of thing. That's the point. You are supposed to be providing an environment for your child to grow and develop and mature physically, morally, spiritually, to have a childhood, have actual childhood experiences. I hear from people all the time, people my age and older, that say, oh man, I remember when I was a kid and we were outside, we would run around in the woods and we would be outside all the time playing tag. And I just wish my kids had that, because the kids these days are just on the screens all day. They don't have a real childhood. And I say that your kids can have that. There's no reason why they can't have it. My kids have that. I work in media, and yet my kids have exactly that kind of childhood, because we just determined from the beginning that our kids they're going to have a real childhood. They are going to run outside and scrape their knees and climb trees. And that's what they're going to do. That's the kind of childhood they should have. And it is possible to have it. The only difference now is that it has to be a choice. I think 30 years ago, that was just the default.
So more than a choice. I mean, you have to organize. Well, you're the one with 6 kids who are homeschooled, so you tell me, but it sounds from the outside like you have to reorganize your entire life around that goal.
You do.
It doesn't happen naturally, right?
Right. It doesn't happen naturally.